Good evening. It's a great pleasure to. Could I just ask those of you who have your mobile phones on if you could actually switch them off, please, if you don't mind. It's a great pleasure to welcome Shane de Blacam to the AA. Many of us have waited a long time to have this opportunity to hear Shane and see the work. I count myself fortunate for having seen a number of the projects, and I think it's also from a different point of view quite an interesting situation. The context within which the work of the practice has developed. It's hard for us to imagine in London really a group of young practices coming together, having an important role to play in terms of the development of the plan or the master plan of the part of the city, and then see them all work together somehow, at least from the outside, in some kind of form of unity and friendship and coherence to really rebuild part of the city, which is what has happened in Dublin. And I think that it's also very clear when you visit there that so many of the young generation of Irish architects hold Shane in such high esteem and look to him and look to the work of the practice in terms of really establishing directions that are worth pursuing, and I think that that's also a very important aspect of the work of the practice of the Blacam and Meagher. Shane studied in Dublin and then went to the States, to Philadelphia, to study at University of Pennsylvania, when at that time Louis Kahn was really the main professor. This is in the late 60s and early 70s, and then stayed on to work with Louis Kahn on the Mellon Center at Yale, the British Center for Art at Yale University. Among the practice's recent projects, or the ones at least that we would be more familiar with, I should mention the library at Cork Institute of Technology, the Beckett Theatre at Trinity College in Dublin, and the more recent timber building for the west end of Temple Bar, which is just, I saw it last year, and it was incomplete, and I guess it's just finished or finishing now. I think an aspect of the practice that also is important to mention is that in many of the projects there is the use of what might be called traditional materials, whether they're wood or brick. But what is also interesting is the way in which the practice really uses these materials, reinterprets these materials, so that they, in a sense, are coming out of their traditional situation and traditional use, and developed in terms of wonderful details, attention to light, and more importantly, the understanding of the relationship between architecture and the urban context. Would you please join me in welcoming Shane de Blacam.
Thank you very much. I was preparing the slides here about an hour ago, and I was sat in there at a table, and the doors were crossed, and there was a man giving a lecture here, and he was talking about ideas of sustainability and the modern city and information, and he was giving out about Raphael Moneo, and I thought that maybe that if he was here, or if he's still here, he would say that I was an old-fashioned architect. And so I went up and I had a drink in the bar with some friends, and I have put together to show the background. I mean, somebody from the AA said, "What is it? You know, what's it?" They wanted a title, so I said that we would just show some recent projects. And I will do that. But I wanted to show some of the. I mean, just really to show the sort of the whole picture of the work in the office since we started. And one aspect of that is the seriousness with which, if you look at what is the buildings and how projects or how people get work in Dublin, of the position of the architectural competition in Dublin. And I mean, the work that John Maher and I got when we started, I mean, originally we were teaching in UCD, and I was teaching full-time for a while after I came back from America. And then John and I were entering competitions. And over the last 20 years, there have been a succession of competitions. And then arising, and I mean, we got some projects, we got some buildings out of those, and some of them weren't built. And each one of these projects, or the early projects that I'm going to show, came out of architectural competitions. And that's that was how the city projects that came, that Group 91 were involved in. And they won a competition, and then they were fortunate in the people that followed through the competition to build the buildings. And there was if I can show the first slide, is a famous competition that a lot of people who were teaching in UCD at that time, or who were connected with Dublin through the rejuvenation of the School of Architecture in UCD. And I see here this evening several friends who were in that, with whom I taught, and who were the teachers of architects now in Dublin who have projects. And this, just because people who don't know Dublin are not familiar with it, it's just nice to show you the landscape and to show you the city. North of the city on the west, in Phoenix Park, there was a competition. The government had a competition to build a house for the Prime Minister. And in the Phoenix Park, at the intersection of the Phoenix Park, is the monument of the Phoenix. And there, behind the Phoenix, is an entrance to that site there. And there is also another site there, and there's a third site there for three important houses. That's the President's house, the American Ambassador's house, and the former Papal Nuncio's house. And can I show the next two slides, please? The landscape was that, and coming from the Phoenix Monument in the center of the park, the site for the Prime Minister's house was where there was a neoclassical building that was demolished, and there was a walled garden, and the project consisted of two buildings. There was a guest house and the Prime Minister's house. And at the end of the road, we proposed to build a square building on one floor with double height on 5 squares by 5 squares, with a perimeter on the exterior of it, with a forecourt on one side of the walled garden, which was connected through, although separate and independent, access from the north to the guest house. Can I have the next slide on the left, please? 5 squares and by 5 squares, on a timber and a frame construction of about 4.5 meters square, and the front room, or the first room, which is the entrance hall, was also the living room, and off the living room was a dining room, which was in 2 parts, with an ingle nook or a hearth, where there was a second dining table there. There was a service kitchen on that side, and a small study off this hall or living room. And on these 5 squares here, there was a third entrance to it, which is the secretary's entrance, and there was a hall or atrium in the middle, which went through to a staircase, and this side of the building were 2 floors, which corresponded to the single floor, which was on the other side. And there was a kitchen, a family kitchen, with a table and a dining room, and a family sitting room, and the Prime Minister's office, and his meeting room, and then the bedrooms of that were on the first floor. The section through that is the section through, actually this room here was 3 stories in height. That part on the right is the single story on the north, and 2-story was on the left-hand side. The next 2 slides, please. The construction of the external paneling of the house was in oak, and the next 2 slides, please. And the perimeter outside of the 5 squares had a deep double height sort of loggia to the public rooms, or to the larger entertaining room, and then the 2 floors of the bedrooms and the private rooms of the Prime Minister's own rooms. And about the perimeter of it was this outer construction outside the 5 squares, which gave the sort of spaces that were insulated, and then also within the depth of that. The next slide here, on the first floor, there was the minor rooms adjacent were found bathrooms in the light on the perimeter of the main construction. The next 2 slides, please. Can you take this one back for a moment, please? And just the interior drawings that were made for that house showed rooms that were partitioned, or that the main structure of which was in frame, and there were sliding partitions which opened into connecting one room into the other, and glass partitions into the double height hall. Can I have the next slide on the right, which are the drawings that were made for the furnishing of the rooms. The next slide on the right, and the Prime Minister's office, which was a room that had a table and a desk, a table with some books and library and some windows to the garden. And that was an important project, and that was a project that actually was never, Shalliff and Evans won that competition, and the project didn't go ahead. The next slide, please, the 2 slides. Shortly after that competition, we entered another one, and this drawing is shown back to front, but it's actually the right way round, so I can describe it. There was the Archbishop of Dublin had a project, had a competition to build churches on sites in the suburbs of Dublin that were not specific. In other words, that there wasn't a particular site given, and we made a proposal in thinking about things like that, like the wall garden in the Phoenix Park, to make a wall, to make an enclosure within which there was the modern plan of the church, which is of a congregation in 4 sections around the sanctuary in the middle, which are separated by courtyards, glass and wood walls, which formed the external courts, and an orchard for the priest, and then the entrance through a sort of atrium into the confessional and the sacristy in advance. I mean, it is incidental that it is cruciform, but within the next slide, please, on the right. A very modest budget that afforded us to build it, to build a wall in concrete block around a diaphragm wall, to make this, as it were, a garden. Outside the entrance to the church here, this is the entrance of which that is the photograph. There is a porch, just a concrete frame, through which. And now the next slide on the right. And you see through this porch to the doors of the entrance, and you see the beginning of the glass screen. And now the next slide on the left, please. That was the model that was made at the time for it, which is one version of the entrance door into the court, into the wood and glass screen of cruciform plan within the block wall courtyard. And the next slide on the right. And the doors, through the entrance, this is reversed now. That slide is reversed. It's not quite correct. And the next slide on the left, please. The structure proper of is a concrete frame within the walled garden. And there's sort of elaborate set of doors in teak, which are the big doors which might be open on Sunday, and then the smaller doors. And the next slide on the right, the smaller doors within the courtyard. And the next slides, both slides. Put back the slide on the left, please, if you just hold it. And then these slides, then, if you could go back to show me the one of the plans, so that I can just refer to the plan of while I'm talking about the slides. I mean, that's the sort of, that's the view here of this corner here within one garden between two arms, as it were, of the cross. Next slide. On the right, please. These are a series of slides that show the relationship or the views within the walled garden. Next slide. On the right. And that's the view here. That actually is the plan of the sort of room for the confessional within the timber and concrete frame. And if I go quickly through the slides on the right, you see that was the first sort of building that we built. I mean, that was built in 1978. Next slide. And internally, then, I mean, if you were sitting here, you could see across to the other side, and there is a sort of communication, or there's a conversation between the wings of the church. Next slide. And the next slide. And go on, please, just go through them, just to show, just then, there's some small detail then of the ventilation, or the opening sections of, within that, sort of in the corner areas here. That's the corner of the windows, or the opening sections. Next slide. And the next slide on the left. And go on to the plan, please, and the next plan. In the centre of Dublin City, Trinity College is a sort of island of 54 acres, which is surrounded by a railing which go around the perimeter of it in the centre of the city. And I can just show you the streets. This street here leads to the river, and it comes this way into Temple Bar, and it comes that way on Dame Street to the medieval city, which is on axis, which is a 19th century commercial street, which was built on either side of what is the west front of the college, which faces the medieval city. And then I want to make some point about this, because I want to refer to drawings later on to which this plan relates. I mean, the plan of the college was built, I mean, it's 400 there's 400 years of building within that site. And so many of these these buildings here that we're looking at are middle 18th century. And I mean, there were other buildings there, I mean, on that campus before that, which were sort of in the liberties, or they were outside of the walled city, which is here to the west of, and the river is here. The river is here, running east and west, is parallel to that, and Temple Bar is here. And just to give you some orientation of the city. And the plan of the college is a plan of squares, the front square, the library square, new square, Botany Bay. And then into that plan, I mean, are the plans of it there where, I mean, the principal buildings these are residential rooms. All of these buildings are residential rooms, or rooms the residences of students, and then there are other there are important public buildings within it. There's Regent House, which is this, which is the front gate, and then that's the chapel, that's the examination hall, and that's the dining hall, about which I want to talk. But before I do, I want to say, just to explain to you, that that's the Provost's house, which is connected by that link from the first house, or the houses is in Oxford and Cambridge College. The rooms are opening off a succession of doors on the ground floor, opening off the square, one after another like that, all the way. There are doors in, and the rooms are opening off the staircase in the residential rooms of the college. And then in that, or in between that, then are the important public buildings. One of the most important of which is the library. And I want to talk about that later on. I want to talk about the library when I'm talking about our own library, and to refer briefly to the competition that was won in 1961, I think, by young graduates of the AA, Arons, Burton and Carlack, and built their, shortly after graduating from their AA, built their best building in Dublin, the library, which is connected by a podium into which makes a connection here between, or fits into the plan of the college in this way. I should have referred to the museum building, which is an important building there with a wonderful staircase. And then on the axis of the printing house here, on top of this podium between the old library and the museum building, ABK built the new library. And then, which is quite different from their later building here, which is the arts building, which was built subsequently, which was their commission in subsequent. And ABK, when they had built those two buildings, they were instrumental in our appointment, because we had built the church in Firehouse, and we had and in competition by interview, Paul Carlack was kind to support us in our appointment to talk to the college about the development of or what buildings they might build, what further new buildings they might build, and to talk about the reusing of buildings. There was a theatre there, which was difficult, and then the dining hall, as you can see, had been enlarged substantially, and out of its original plan of entrance hall, dining hall, and kitchen, the dining hall, which I will refer to, and we had made a proposal that of this for this site. This is the dining hall. Those are the front steps facing south, the south steps, which are of the dining hall. And they had we had made a proposal that out of these, the dining and the social arrangements of the college had sort of got to a difficult stage, and they needed to be rethought. And we had made a proposal to put into that room in there to put a small to open up that building. The next slide on the left, please. And we suggested that if we were to build a room within that, this was that was a drawing that was presented to the college to show that if there was an interconnection, this is here on the left in the place of the kitchen, that's the hall, and the kitchens are here on the left, that would interconnect the floors of the dining hall, there's a basement floor below that, there's the ground floor, and then there are, and we had made that sketch. And the next slide on the right. And while that conversation was going on, it was our great good fortune that the dining hall was burnt down. And that was the state after the water and demolition of the fire, which knocked the. That's looking back towards the entrance hall. The next slide on the left, please. And that's the later drawing of the proposal that we wanted to make. In restoring our building, in putting back the hall, the dining hall, there was, an aspiration, or we wanted to build a room beside that. And there is that. There was an understanding in Trinity College about an easy understanding of I'll refer to it later, about the changes that were made in the library, in the old library, but that they knew readily to build a modern building alongside the old buildings such as that they had learnt or that they had done with ABK in ABK's new library. And so those were some of the next slide on the right, please. In the place of the kitchen, then, alongside, this was us taking out the layers of buildings that had been put into it and excavating to make a space in which to build this room in the place of the kitchens alongside the hall. The next slide on the right and the same on the left. And that was before the fire. That was the style of the senior common room. And can I just briefly go through the plan of the building to show the south steps, the entrance hall, the vestibule or stairs here to this common room, which is in the floor above that. And then the dining hall is there, and the kitchens were there. And into that, and in rethinking all of that, all of the social life or the social arrangements for students and staff and the student unions were to be rethought and replanned within that building. And that was the basis of the plan, which was, because of the corruption of the plan, it wasn't that difficult where formerly the entrance, it had become so corrupt that the front entrance to the building was somewhere here. And these were the plan. They were perfectly good kitchens and other rooms which we were involved in. In the replanning of that before the fire. And the next slide on the right, please. And that was putting back the entrance hall. And what we sought to do, is the next slide on the right, was to simplify and to bring the sunlight, to bring the daylight into this hall, and to remove, or just to take back, and to paint it white. Next slide. On the right, please. And on the right again. And the floor with sunlight on of the entrance hall. And the next slide on the right. From the entrance hall into the dining hall. The next slide on the right. And in the hall, which I had gone to school when we were I think we were still in the Bauhaus tradition, that history was virtually written off the agenda, off the curriculum, and we had to learn pretty fast about what was expected, or to understand the hierarchy of Palladian. And we knew what we wanted. In a sense, we knew what to do in terms of that. I wanted to put back a white floor, a new stone floor. I wanted to paint it white. We wanted to bring the daylight into it, and and in doing that, to relieve the windows here and on this side where the daylight had been excluded in the reconstruction of the hall. I'll say no more about that. Because the big issue for us was the next slide on the left. In this section, which shows the section across the buildings, the hall is here. Our proposal for the atrium is there. Our proposal for bars and restaurants, which I'll just skip over. It's an elaborate and complex and huge brief of incorporating the student union, and to deal with the college, which was convulsed by not this, but there was a succession of fires. There was a sort of it was just an extraordinary time in the college, and the college was convulsed, and then it was very important for, I suppose to keep calm in one sense, but also the aspiration, or to try to build. The next slide on the right. Small things that from the dining hall, the reconstruction of tables, the remaking of the paneling on the walls, the opening through fire doors into the kitchens, and the remaking of the kitchens. And the next slide on the right, please. And the opening of the serveries, and the next slide on the right. And the question of the cutlery and the water and the service in that. And so they were small things that were going on around the perimeter in there were at least half a dozen of those kind of incidents in it. But go on to the right, please, the next slide. And we had done a small building in a house. We had built, we had taken the inside out of a small terrace house in the South Circular Road, and we had put in a timber frame in solid oak, in just 4 columns on 2 floors, to remake the spine wall in a house. And that was the sort of inspiration for the structure that we proposed to make within the volume of the old kitchen, where on the ground floor, which was that there was to be space or there was some social space that was being made that had no brief, but that was to be a sort of entry space to the students' bar and to the student union facilities here on the ground floor. The middle floor, or the first floor here, which corresponds with the level of the hall, was to connect through, but was also to make connections into the servery behind that panelling on the north wall there, and which is at the level which also connected in there. And then the upper levels of that room, which were shuttered, where the staff felt at that stage that they wanted to be independent of the students who were confined to the lower floors. And the design of the 4 facades of this sort of small square, which is mirrored on the floor with Portland stone inset in quarry tile. Then, if you go to the next slide on the right, please. On either end, that is on either end, there are 4 floors. Which there was, and there's at this level here, there was an exhibition gallery which came around there, and then there was private dining rooms there behind the galleries, which had wooden doors and wooden shutters on the outside of it. And there are 2 private dining rooms which are served from the kitchens here on this level. And I just want to go around the 4. That in making these sort of the architecture, or making the facades of the square of this sort of small space. The next slide, please. On the right. Well, there's some details which show here of the panelling or the shutters to the exhibition gallery, or the reverse side of the panels. The next slide. On the right, please. And then the next slide on the right. Yeah, and the next slide on the right. There's one side which is sort of perfect, in the sense that it's not corrupted, or it's not, because the staircase is pushed back onto the wall. The stairs here, you see, that's this facade here. The stairs is pushed. A pair of scissor stairs, or sort of scissor stairs, is going up behind, and they're left free, so that the full sort of aspiration of this sort of architecture, which is made of columns and beams, which are sort of graduating in from floor to floor and reset and stepping back as they go from floor to floor. And the next slide on the right. That's the staircase. And the next slide on the right. Yeah, you can see the staircase now, behind, which is pulled back from this sort of, we call it, we sort of thought that this was the proper facade. This one was, but just only in that it is in conversation with the other facades around it. The next slide on the right. And then, while that was going on, and there's a small detail that I want to tell you about briefly, which I'm showing it because the Viennese came to Dublin last week for the Department of the History of Art, who were on our committee, were part of our client, and came to Dublin then they combined with the German department to have a seminar based around the bar, where we made a mirror image of the the American bar in Vienna, which was just, I mean, there was a room there, and the senior common room, which was a very contentious, issue where I showed you the first slide of it. They wanted a bar, but they really weren't sure what sort of bar, and they didn't know really, they were unfamiliar with, and there were important issues, I suppose, in a way to be clarified for us in terms of what we were doing and how we would build, what sort of building, what sort of architect, what we would do, alongside that was, for ourselves making this kind of argument in the office about the reproduction or the restoration of the hall, and then the making of the bar. And so the books that were on the desk in the office included Adolf Loos and the other Leverins and the Scandinavians, and we were looking at that stuff at the turn of the century, and we were looking at American work, which was my own influence, and this, the secret of the Cartner bar is the columns and beams, which are mirrored to infinity above in a sort of clear story wall, in a clear story light. The next slide on the right. The bar is a tiny room. It's less. It's about that size. Sorry, the bar is about that size. But if you stand on the seat, you don't see it. It's hinted at in the bar are the columns and the in the mirror, which are reflected in the mirror, and there's this brilliant reflection in the upper level to infinity in the mirrors. Of course, we made it as best. We plundered the books in the library, and we made the counter and the stones and the floor and the desks or the benches and the tables as accurately and much in stone and leather, and this we made and painted in MDF. The next two slides on that. And the one on the sorry, put back the one on the left for a moment, please. And the lights, and the next one on the right, and the tables, and the last one on the right. And that's just a story on the side, really, of the columns and beams of the story of columns and beams on two sides of the hall, of the dining hall in Trinity College. The next slide, please, on the left. And if I can just sharpen it. This is a small project that was done 2 years ago on a corner. Can I have the next slide on the right, please? On the corner of near the cathedral of Werburg Street and Castle Street, there was a reservation had been made for road widening on that, and there was a sort of vacant corner there, and there was a reinforced concrete frame building there, and the owner asked us to rebuild, the corporation, with Dublin Corporation, in fact, the city put it to the owner that they would make substantial advantage to them if that corner in the city were to be rebuilt. And so we made a proposal to make to reuse this plan here. The plan on that side is the plan of that street there, and the plan is the plan of this corner. This project is the remaking of that corner, and the brief was complex as it was. It involved and changing. It changed during the course of it. It was originally to be offices, with it was originally to be all apartments, and that was, the corporation were anxious for apartments, but then they changed it during the course of it. And in that plan, out of the existing staircase, and we made a new building. The next slide on the right, and the next slide on the left. on the on this on the I'll just describe what goes on. There's shops and offices on the ground floor. There's offices on these 2 floors, and there's 2 apartments on the top floor. And that room there is 1 apartment. And they step in section from the step around. They go. I mean, this thing turns the corner, and then they step from there. It's cantilevered over, and then it steps back to just give a little pavement here on the corner, and then it gives. There's a roof terrace then there, going down as far as the church on the other side. I'll just you see that's the concrete facade that was there, and then that's the terrace of the building, and that apartment is which overlooks the garden of the cathedral on the other side. The next slide on the right, and again, and that's on the other side of the street, looking back up from the church to the corner on Castle Street. The next slide on the right, and then looking down towards Dublin Castle. And at the end of Castle Street, the most wonderful thing has been recently, I want to just show it there because at the entrance to Dublin Castle, which is there on that corner, at the end of that street is the civic offices have now moved from City Hall to the new office on the river. And the building, the City Hall has now, which was the Exchange, has now been opened, and the offices that were in it was opened, and the Temple Bar then is on the left at the end of that street down on the right. The next slide on the right. That's the interior of that apartment. The next slide. And the roof terrace, and the next slide on the right. And the next slide on the left. That's the Castle Street thing. The next slide on the left. Small house in, that's a sort of normal suburban 19th century street in Dublin. Waterloo Road and the lane and the main street and the Mews Lane at the back. And we had a project to make, to build a Mews house on that, on that lane. And the forecourt is there. There's a passage that goes through from the forecourt to the back garden, and then the living room is a single room here, parallel to that here. So the living room, that's the party wall there, the white wall. That slide is taken from the front door, looking into the back door. Next slide on the right. Next slide on the left. That's the plan from the front court to the back garden with the living. The living room is a single room, and in there's sort of 2 pieces on either side of the main room. There's this piece, which is the hall, which has the bedrooms open to the hall, and the living rooms and the coats and things in the depth of this here, along in that in that passage. I kind of think that I would prefer not to have done the roof light like that. I mean, I think that it's sort of, I'm just referring to it because I want to show, just because of to refer that there is that I would have preferred, but for reasons of economy at the time, it was done with just a glass roof like that. And I much prefer to deal with the question of the clear story of the daylight at high level in clear story rather than in a greenhouse way. So that's, I just showed you that, because it's to follow an argument or follow the theme and to show the apartment building that I'm coming to in a few moments. The next slide, please, on the right and on the left. We were asked to do a competition in partnership with a firm of architects in Cork on a campus of a technical college. There are about 8 or 10 of those campuses in the provincial towns in Ireland. the regional technical colleges, which was a system-built concrete frame panel and single-glazed aluminium windows, of which they weren't. I mean, they were not proud of. And there had been experience elsewhere in other cities where they had either built on top of them or built around them, and I mean, we were we're anxious for two reasons really. One is that, I mean, we had done enough, I suppose, fiddling with old buildings, and we said that that thing is really, I mean, whatever integrity it has its own integrity. I mean, of its, in that there is, I mean, there's a fairly rigorous, flexible frame that can be refitted, but that if it's that if the air is damaged or the ventilation is damaged in it, so, and that was one reason, but the other reason is that really that we wanted to build a new building, and we didn't want to corrupt or to interfere with the possibility of building a new building. And they were anxious, the Institute were anxious, and there was successive interviews with, and we were called back on a number of occasions to interview to explain those two principles as to why, as to why they should build a new building and make a plan like this. So what we said was that the circulation of that building is an east-west passage there, through that. Although the front entrance is there, and we said that if you were to build a building here that faced west, and it's actually just on that, you said east-west, but it's actually north-south. I mean, that street is north-south. So that we said if we built a wall that faced south, then you could have a courtyard that was sort of separate from this other building, and that it wasn't very difficult to walk across a courtyard, although the experience in Ireland had been that academics were terrified to walk in the open air and not to have some cover, and that the sort of the principle of going, I mean, of walking in the air between buildings could be a planning principle that you could use. And can I just show you some of the other slides here on the left, because I put them in because I had them. That's the North Library in the British Library. Smirke's plan for this sort of arrangement of books, and in a passage with the daylight between the books and galleries at upper level. And next slide. And in Stockholm, they had copied, I mean, the British Library, they had copied the room in the British Library. And he had an idea about a hall or a public space or a reading room surrounded with books. And the reading room in the next slide was that, I mean, that's the Stockholm reading room, which is sort of plain and, I didn't love it. I mean, the next slide. And in Trinity, the library in Trinity had, that's like Smirke's plan. I mean, that's like the North Room in the British Library, in the British Museum, where the daylight comes between the books. And one of the things I was going to say about that was that what they had, that library originally was that size, and they, to make it into the library that it is today, Dean and Woodward took the roof off of it and added the upper floor to make the galleried room at the upper level with the light coming between the books. The next slide. And Louis Kahn in Exeter had sort of recreated an Italian ideal of a desk in the window and a study place in a double height, in a double height room. And the next slide on the left. So this slide is out of place, but I'm going to show it to you and I want to explain one thing about it. and it's a bad slide, but it's the only one that I have of it because the model was destroyed. But the crescent that we proposed here, that said that if there was a plain wall built there and you had no brief, that would act as a controlling or a guiding proposition to build in increments, in 3 phases, the extension of this library. And a number of years ago, I mean, whatever the time, I was talking to a friend here in the AA, that I spoke about this library, and arising out of that and the completion of that library, we now have a plan of that sort of scale. That's what we're working on at the moment in the office, which is a circus, which is here on the north in this position here, and that building there, which involves 4 new buildings and an entrance here and an entrance here, and now a new entrance from the west. And our proposition of the east-west passage here that involved proved true to where the sports and access, the new access now to the college is actually from that side. But that's, I'm not going to say any more about that, other than just to say that that's a really thrilling and sort of wonderful, huge scale of project which we're now working on in the office. And the next slide on the left. So the proposal or the plan for the library in Cork was that the suggestion was that we would build this crescent on the north of the existing, opposite the main circulation route, and that we would knock a hole in that wall there, and that we would cross to a door here in the center of this plan that would then allow, and it's sort of exaggerated in the plan in the way to show that at that time the vision was of that size. I mean, that was a very large-scale development that was proposed, and now, I mean, it has moved on dramatically. I mean, that Scott Talon Walker are building 2 buildings here as well. Next slide on the right. And the slide on the left is the plan and section of 2 phases of this wall. The library plan here, which I just want to talk about a small bit, but I want to show its plan in relation to its section. And the proposition was for this to build the wall which would guide the development and make the crescent. And then the entrance was there, and the circulation was in the passage here in the middle, and then we pulled the book stacks apart in the way that I've shown you in Trinity and in the North Library, in the British Library, in the British Museum. And this discovery of pulling the stacks apart to make rooms, to make sort of rooms like the atrium in Trinity, now to make 6 atriums sort of side by side, and these rooms that could be extended as well to expand the library. And the next slide, sorry, if I can just briefly just show if it bears study for a second, the section. That section is true. The plan is in the proper relationship with the section. I had a sort of, I mean, there were 2 things. I mean, we were talking about building walls, and I mean, the whole structure of this thing is a sort of, is a sequence of different kinds of wall building. I mean, there's a diaphragm wall, which is the same as the church in Firhouse. Diaphragm wall in the front, which is just that thick wall, which is this wall here, which gave you those kind of openings in it, and limited the amount of direct sunlight. And then the walls at right angles to that are block walls, concrete block walls, just block on flat. But then the block walls sort of lend, I mean, and they were to be covered with books, so the block was not shown. The block was not shown internally. And then, in order to make a sort of large room, I mean, on the left of this central passage, where the walls didn't come through, in the middle of the span, I put in columns in those positions there. I'll refer to those columns in a minute. And then, so if you can bear with me to understand this section, that's the section through the stacks. but the stacks are separated in that there are 3 floors of stacks divided between tables of study tables, and the passage, which is this roof light here, the passage which is in the center between the stacks and the reading room. The reading room then proper is this kind of room that has the columns sort of staggered through it, which are those columns there. And the beam, I mean, these pieces of walls here are the residual ends of these walls here, which come across, which gave the deep thickness to this wall here that had not only on the ground floor windows to the reading room, so that those windows on the ground floor are the windows of the reading room, but on the first floor gave the periodicals. And then for economy, the block walls are covered with books, but then in the passage it becomes brick. And then where the brick doesn't span, or where the wall doesn't go to span, then the columns are introduced. So there is a sort of purpose, or there was a kind of continuity of sort of rigor about the construction and the structure of that of masonry, of masonry building, as I had learnt it in America. And then there was also there's a notion that it is really a single-story building, but it reads as, because the air is coming from here and is ventilated through here, through the height. So the air also comes from the north. That's the south facade, and it's coming from the north, and the stack then it ventilates. It ventilates. Although the Department of Education, the central government insisted on a mechanical ventilation system, which we were nervous about, with the supply air there and the return air there in circular ducts. So the supply was distributed underneath the desks and was returned there. But the point about all this was the question of the clear story window, which brought the direct sunlight, which is now obscured from on the north wall, which brought the direct sunlight into the passage through, so that the central passage, which, to compound the complexity of it, varies in section on the dimension of it as it goes east and west. In other words, that the height of that passage, which is 3 stories plus the clear story, 4 stories, extends as the plan got deeper. It bears a lot of sort of cover. And this was all, it was rigorously followed through. But the section of this thing steps up as it goes along its length to increase the depth, primarily because of the concern of daylight here in the reading room, that there was the light here, which is to come, that's really the only light, the north light, which is the only light that was. There is also, a switchback that conceals and gives our purpose, which was the blank wall, gives the blank wall and reverts the light here behind that wall, which gives you the extra height in the periodicals. The next slide on the right and on the left. I probably should have had that plan, but the section of it makes it easier to play. The slide, the first view of it that you were seeing of the library, that wall is now 140 meters long. And the first view of it is this. This is actually the first half of it. The library has been doubled in the last few years, and includes now the complexity of the position of the library within the plan, involving lecture theatres and IT, the beginnings of the IT rooms, which are associated with the library. I'll say something about that in a moment, but just to explain more fully the plan. The periodicals are here on the first floor. The reading room is there. There's reading for 500, and then the tables are here between the stacks, which are pulled apart. And in this kind of succession of galleried rooms, galleried rooms, the first room has no furniture. And that was thought about, or was being described as being a sort of free hall. And the desk is here, the entrance is around the desk there and there, and that was the librarian's hall. And then that gives on to the lift and stairs at the back. There's classrooms and offices and accessioning and so on coming in here at the back. The boiler is there, is there at the back, where the air is returned back, and the plant room is all there at the back on that. And this room here has a fireplace in that position. The next slide on the right, and leave the one on the left, please, and I'll just describe them. The detail, I mean, the tradition in Cork is to build in white, to have the most wonderful white limestone and brick, and that, I mean, there's a sort of very modest effort. I mean, modest, I mean, the aspiration would be was to combine stone and brick, to use the warehouses in Cork City, and the docks are built like this, and the cathedral, Shandon Cathedral, has two sides of the tower and the cathedral are in red sandstone, and the front sides of it are in white limestone. So this notion of white limestone and brick and the slates, that's the details of the diaphragm wall opening the windows into the reading room, and the light then coming through in the central passage beyond the reading room. And the next slide, please. That's the, I mean, and the concrete block is exposed externally then, I mean, at a certain point where the extension, where it is anticipated that the building would extend. The next slide on the right. The entrance hall, where, and then that's the, I mean, in the hall where there's just, I mean, this direct sunlight comes into it. That's the signal of the central passage. The doors are modest, and elsewhere the doors are recessed in behind the brick, so that they don't, I mean, just to make the brick read, I suppose, and to read the masonry, or to clarify or to simplify the, I suppose, or to the next slide. You see the reading room, which is signalled by that, and the central passage of which the beginnings of which the next slide. And that's the passage then from the which goes through between the tables in the reading room on the left and the galleried rooms on the right. The concrete slab, the precast concrete slab, which is a commercial or an industrial slab, which is span about the 6. It's built on a 5.6 meter grid, which was mathematically made up for the most economic dimension that we could make of this. The next slide on the right, please. I'll go back, I mean, just to show, I mean, sorry, I was just going to show, in explaining the building, to explain the construction of it. The next slide on the right, please. I mean, a concrete column these staggered columns here, which are sort of waltzing or sort of coming through the space, which are not in a line, which is very beautiful, which are poured in cardboard, and then and there's the beam, the downstand beam, which is coming off that column onto that column, and as it were propped, off the brick column there and there. And then the sort of ordinary block wall, which is now to be covered in books. The next slide. And that's the sort of, then that's kind of, I was sort of better able to do those things, and that was done then by a man who makes furniture. I mean, that was the library man, now making those in about 125 or 150 square laminated solid columns and beams, and colonnade to the book stacks on the ground floor. The next, I mean, that's before. I mean, on the installation of the sort of the book stack into the concrete frame. The next slide. And then you see off the passage, each stack, each gallery, as it were, has its own staircase, and the staircase here goes to 2 levels, of which are student access, and the upper level then, which is the reserve access of books. The next slide. That's this first hall, which has the fireplace and the lift and the access to the offices. The next slide. And that's the reading room then from the passage, and the book, the periodicals are on the upper floor, and then the windows, the windows on the ground floor, and the light then, that's the switched back light that's coming into the periodicals on the wall facing out to the front, to the blank wall. Next slide. And the next. I'll just go through them now. That's sort of a shot, and there's another one of the general view of the library, of the passage and the stacks and the tables, and then the periodicals in the brick, which corresponds with the brick in that there. And we said about the question, I mean, the librarian was concerned about the question of computers and tables and so on, and that how many computers they could afford and so on, and the realization that it's actually place for study, and whether there's a book or a computer on the table, it's only a matter of a wire, and that I mean, that has irritated when we've gone to interview in other universities for libraries. That philosophy of the blank wall has irritated university. I mean, what I'm saying is that, I mean, a librarian in an interview in another university was holding the table in rage with the concept of a blank wall, which he said is the opposite of his idea of a library, which is that it is open, accessible, and transparent to students, and that notion of desks, I mean, in that fashion, which are not mobile, which are fixed by wires and cables, I mean, is tough. Next slide on the right. That's the periodicals looking down. The next slide on the right. And then the enfilade of the reserve books on the top level coming through, and not just on the top level. This looking down into the central passage of the reserve books. Then there is also passage through the books in this way for readers through the stack, so that as the complexity goes on. Next slide on the right. Yeah, I mean, that's from the upper level looking through the south light, the clear story light, into the reading room. The next slide on the right. And that's the last slide of those, of the concrete and brick and timber interior. Next slide on both, please. On the left, if you can focus it, please. This is the site at the other end of Dame Street, at the west end of Temple Bar. And if I can, it's not clear, but I mean, if you just bear with me, I'll show you. That's the river, that's the quays, and that's Parliament Street, and that's Dublin Castle. And the building that I was referring to, the corner building, is that corner there. That's the corner that I was referring to at the junction of Castle Street and Werburgh Street there. It's actually not that corner. In fact, it's just further along that street. It's about there, that corner that I was showing, and I was referring down to the City Hall, which is now open as a single room. And the entrance to the castle, to Dublin Castle, is there. And then there was a bank building, a white stone bank building that was built there. And coming at the latter end of the sort of projects in Temple Bar, there was a sort of feeling that it was all understood and that everybody knew how to do it, and that there was a rules about how you do it, and that the rules were that there were some of the rules. Well, let me just explain one or two things before I say the rules. But the wall of the city, the medieval wall, is there, was underneath that. So, and there are medieval buildings there. So the archaeology was still a big issue. It had been an issue on the civic offices 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and then Parliament Street was a wide street commissioner, was a grand street, was built opposite City Hall. Parliament Street from the river to the City Hall, or the exchange as it was a sort of stock exchange, an 18th century stock exchange, and before it was the City Hall. And Parliament Street sort of cut across in the way at the other end of Dame Street that Trinity College was putting in. Trinity College, that gate that I showed you, is here at the other end of Dame Street. So the Dame Street is there, Trinity College at the end, Parliament Street here coming on, overlaying the 18th century plans on the medieval city. And if there was anything that was sort of in the spirit of what was medieval in this part of Dublin, it is evident in the streets. I mean, that these streets here, and the street, Exchange Street Upper, which is our street, is probably might have been the street from the river to the castle. And that sensibility was certainly was not there, and and there was a sort of a number of plans had been done, with the conclusion of which was that you build 3-story, possibly a setback on the 4th story, streets in the city, in the Dublin. That was the rule about how you made the city. The rules for the making of this city, of the Dublin, were, and plans had been rejected by the Dublin Corporation on the basis that they said that that's how you do it. And if you looked around the city, I mean, you saw what was being done in these streets, in the making of streets and so on, and trying to find the forms of building to fit in, or forms, significant or meaningful forms of how to make a street in Dublin. Actually, the rule was pastiche. I mean, there was a pastiche rule which said that if you paper the perimeter of the footpath with 3 and 4 stories, set it back 1, that actually there was, I mean, there's a vast amount of cardboard city being built. And if you wanted to build and then the Group 91 had built this half of the Temple Bar, and then there were 5 practices where this site here at the western end of Temple Bar was divided between them, and there were master plans done for it, and there were project managers put in charge of it, and it was generally accepted that there was a lot of money had been lost in the first half of Temple Bar, and they were going to make money in the second half, and that the wisdom was that there was 4 stories, or 3 stories and 4-story setback. And the managing director of Temple Bar, sort of having seen all this, that it was, when we were briefed on it, took us aside when we were going out the door. She said, have a go, to actually to go against everything that had been set up, and now, I mean, if you look at the city, I mean, or if you looked at what was going on in the medieval city, and if you looked at the height, I mean, there's a chimney on the end of that building there, and there is the towers on the cathedral there, and there's the tower that you saw over the in the castle in that area there, and we put it in at a very early stage. I mean, we said that if you built about the height of some of the other buildings, that you could have a building that was like that in the city block. That block there, which is our block, and there's the block. And we made a proposal that we would build a building that broke the height or the wall of the city, and that would give us a plan of a modern apartment building around a staircase and a lift, that had a lift lobby on the ground floor in the American fashion, and that lift took you to the views of the city at the high level on the upper floors. And the next slide on the left and the right. And another model that was made of this tower that had now was beginning to be, it was crude in the beginning, or was now beginning to be clarified in relation to what I mean, as to how I mean, what should be a plan of it, and how to circulate it, and how to deal with fire, and so on. So those are 2 of the early models. Now, these are the drawings of it as it was built, and I'll try to describe it to you. If you've seen it, that it is on this street that comes from the river, the medieval street that comes from the river to the castle, and that the possibility that from the upper levels, that here, that the southern sun was, I mean, I felt that if you worked it out, that it was actually quite a reasonable thing to do, was to build, if you dealt with all the conditions, if you dealt with that condition, if you dealt with that condition, and you understood that there was a relationship that could be made between the upper levels of this. If I go back to this plan here on the left for a moment, I'll try and explain the relationship between that. The plan on the left, please. Yeah, I mean, that the tower that we suggested was here, on the basis that this entrance, not that relationship, that this relationship here, the relationship that was made between the gate of the castle, Newcomen Bank, and the west facade of City Hall, and a building that was put in here, that was a relationship that could have been made, and that it could have been reasonably discussed with conservation bodies and with the local authority, and said that by examination and by understanding of the relationships and seeing that really these rules and in that area, that was a sensible thing to do. Can I go back then to the next slide? And I'll just describe the building now quite in a straightforward way. Our site extended from there to there, and in making a single staircase lift building, we needed about that width, and I was anxious to make an entrance to the courtyard in the middle, to make a split, to make a crack in the street that would bring the western light through between the two buildings, put the two buildings within less than a metre at the highest level between them, to make and then to bring the light, to push out the canopy that was to protect the southern sun on this one that was forming this roof garden for those 3 apartments on the top of that, so that the daylight came down between the buildings down to the ground, where there was a flight of stairs behind those gates to go into the garden in the interior of the court. This is the garage door for the whole block, for the development into the whole block, and then these apartments here were just to fill in that piece of the street, and were to make, which were in advance of the creche, which was part of our brief, which is behind those 2 buildings in the garden behind that. Now, simply the 3-bedroom apartments were to the south, and 1-bedroom apartments were to be on the north of the stairs and lift in the middle. The next slide on the left. On the back side to the courtyard, this is the interior elevation of the interior elevation. This is the split between the 2 buildings that made the entrance into the garden. This is the creche, which was on 2 stories, and then this apartment here had the roof of that for its garden. This apartment had that garden, and this apartment here had the roof garden of the whole lot of it. And then these 2 windows here face north. They were all glass facing north in that direction. These are the living rooms of the 1-bedroom apartments. And in the making of the tower, the expression of the brick was an idea about a hearth, or that there was a chimney, or that the living room was sort of pulled out of it, and there's a fireplace, which is this chimney, and that it had a bay window. There's a bay window, which I'll show in detail, which is a sort of, and really not a balcony, just a sort of crack where you could open a door and stand out, but better sit inside and have the door open and have the feeling of space beyond, but then also to have this window. And there is a sort of notion, which I'm not sure about the success of it, is that there was a double height, that the living room, which faces west, because it took, I'll explain it in the section later on, you'll have to see it, that it takes, that apartment there had its roof, as it were, in the window, which makes this makes a high window in that apartment. The next slide on the left, and the next slide on the right. Just to quickly explain the buildings at ground level, then this is the crack between it, which is quite wide, where the staircase comes up, and this is the garage to the basement, and that's the basement plan of the 2 buildings. The next slide of the plan on the left, ground floor. At the garden level, then the flight of stairs comes up into the garden here. The creche is here at the rear, and the entrance to this block of apartments is here. The stairs is there, which divides that, and then the 1-bedroom apartment to the north, which is a bedroom and a hall and a bathroom and a living room and an ingle nook here, which reverses into the back of the living room here, with the fireplace here in this living room with its balcony here and the bay window there. Now, go to the next floor, which is the next one up, where the plan begins. As you go up the building, it gets less, it's clearer, it's not as complicated. The next slide on the left. You can sort of see what the plan is trying to do. It's what is setting out to subvert both the fire regulations and the tax incentive floor areas of the, of size of rooms which to which these which limit the size of the apartments. So, I thought that maybe in a 3-bedroom apartment there might be really only 2 rooms, and that that if the kitchen, the dining room, the bedroom, and that if you to try and read that plan, but with sliders and with pivots, that if you slid the door, the partition between those 2 rooms back there, then you could join that room to there. If you open the pivot of that one into that, then that really makes 1 room. And then really a 3-bedroom apartment is really only 1 bedroom, because there's a bed there and its bathroom is there. And then the living room, or the other room here, also has a slider which separates the living room from the hall, so that the hall also has daylight. I should explain the core, which is a lift, stairs, and vent shaft, which is the fire regulation to allow you to build a 9 or 10-story building with a single staircase. And similarly, in the 1-bedroom apartment, which is by regulation 300 is 33 square meters, and so so that has pivot doors. There's a pivot door there. The bed is kind of hidden behind the bathroom, so that the daylight goes through from front to back, and it really feels like that it's really sort of 1 room. It has a chaise longue and this little ingle nook on the other side, and the kitchen is there in the corner with the table. The next slide on the left. And the next slide on the right, please. Can you put in the other box of slides on the left? That's, as you go up the apartments, they vary from apartment to apartment, but basically there is a sort of 3-bedroom and a 1-bedroom apartment notionally. And then there's a bridge from the kitchen of that one onto the roof of that one. The next one, please, on the left. The section through it, the next one on the left. That's some of the working drawings of the front elevation of it. Just to say something about the materials, if you focus the one on the right, that's the sort of, however successful it is, I'm not too sure, but that was the proposition, that this tower would have a relationship with this stone building, with the City Hall on the right, and the bank on the left, coming in here straight. I'm standing at the gate of Dublin Castle, and then the top 3 floors with the southern windows, with these 3, which is really now only 1 room, which becomes 1 room as I've explained in plan. That room there then has this extraordinary perspective of the mountains to the south and the shade of the canopy over it, and then this little triangle of city space here between the restored City Hall and the entrance to the castle, and this building here, which has a plain stone wall, just a sort of stone, with the chimney, but which is kind of about the height of what we said we would sort of build to. And in the construction of it, there is a concrete frame which is faced in timber, which permits you to have these kind of depth of opening, which has got these balconies like in the atrium in Trinity, and doors and furniture inside in the thickness of that. Within the room, the wardrobes are there and there. Those are the windows of the 2 bedrooms, but that's actually the living room here. And so there's a concrete frame which is expressed by that column, the concrete column which goes up there, which is the only place it's seen. And then that's the timber paneling of the 3-bedroom apartment. And the brick was brought through really to make, I suppose, kind of for the purposes of composition, to sort of contrast with this, and then to contrast also with the split between the 2 buildings, where the stairs goes up into the courtyard at the back and the garage door is there. And there's a small shop in here. The staircase is there. And I had seen I've always been looking at Leveren's brick and Asplin's brick, and we had a device. I mean, there's this nightmare of architects going on site with the panels of brickwork laid out by brick manufacturers, and it's really all to do with what side you get out of the bed at, or whether you have one brick or the other, and it's actually got nothing to do with making a wall. I mean, I sort of discovered that the thing about brick was really the joints, and so to feel the weight of masonry, so we double the size of the bed. It's 19 or 18 mil, 19, 20 mil sort of order of thickness of joint, which then also allows you to make a rough arch because of the thickness of the joint in forming the arch, and that flat arch then spans about 2.6 meters, and it doesn't have the sort of, it's within the economy of not having to make gauge or pay for to have cut bricks. It is possible to make a sort of masonry architecture out of and to use a white mortar then, where the mortar then takes over and becomes the sort of becomes the wall making business of reading brick in a wall. The next slide, please, on both. It's desperately hard to photograph this building, and all these slides now, I have to apologize, and that's Peter Cook's photograph on the right, so he can take the credit. He can take the credit for it. But that's looking down the street. This is the building before the timber tower, and then the canopy on the front. The thought was that the front entrance, that this canopy here, which comes out beyond the footpath, makes a sort of entrance to the whole thing. That's the entrance canopy for that facade. The next slide on the right. Yeah, that's looking down the street. And there's the screening canopy to the south on the glass fronted apartments, and then and this canopy which comes out, which is very strong on the footpath. Although it's 8 stories or 9 stories high, it makes a sort of porch or hall or sort of space at the ground level of that fellow up there. Next slide on the right. That's the slide from the rear. With the 1-bedroom sitting rooms here, which have got these quite elaborate windows, and they're ingle nook, and there's little columns on those windows internally, and they're top hung casements and side hung ventilators on the side of those, similar to the ones over here. And this is the double height glass to the living rooms of those apartments. There's a kind of stolen level where you bring the level of the seat of the bay window, give the lower end of it to the apartment below it, and some of the shading or some of the screening then of this sort of stepping of the timber, weathering of timber, and so on is being protected also by the overhang of timbers on the top. The next slide on the right. And in parts where it's less, in some parts on the street on the front, I'll come to it in a second, but in the split between the buildings, it's sheeted and covered. The board is covered, and but it's also over under the windows. Those are the kitchen windows in the 2-bedroom. They are panelled, framed and panelled. The next slide on the right. That's the facade. That's the front onto Exchange Street, where on the top floor then you have the top floor has this double height apartment with this deep, extraordinary admission of daylight, of this depth underneath that screen, which is there's a sort of extraordinary calm of. I'll show it in the interior slides in a moment. Separating, that's the bedrooms, and those are the living rooms, and that's the ordinary apartment. And when it comes down here, it gets a bit iffy because of the light. There's light. The light is fine there in that apartment because it has the light from there, and the one down below maybe is struggling. But there, in the struggle to build the thing, they took 2 floors off of it, and it would have been better. It would have been. When you see it when it's built, it would be no problem to put 2 or 3 floors on top of it. It could easily handle another 2 or 3 floors without conflict, or without exaggerating its significance. And but I'll show you. I'll refer to the light. Those are the sections. I'm not sure that the one that it deals with very adequately. That's the back window on the top floor. And a wonderful thing happened, that the man who was the advisor, the economist who was advisor to the to all the development in Temple Bar, they sold these apartments. They hired the Shelbourne Hotel and the ballroom in the Shelbourne Hotel, and they put 19 of these apartments at auction in one afternoon, and they sold for astronomical sums of money. And this man spent his life's fortune on this building, on the top floor. He got the top floor, and he has the roof garden. And we had in mind, in this room on the top floor, which is actually triple height, which looks over the roof garden, which I'll show in a second, the top roof garden. And there was a library to go in that. And so when he bought it, he came to the office and he said, would we finish it the way we wanted? And so now we're putting a library. The library is going into the top floor now. The next slide on the right. The next slide on the right. The colour is crazy in that. The next slide on the right. And the colour is funny in that one as well. But the forecourts and the Phoenix Park on the west, and then the roof garden, his roof, the library is there, and this the canopy. There's a sort of a pergola thing. And a bay window here onto the roof garden of that, and the screen. This is beautiful, the glass screen on that one. But I haven't got a slide of it. Next slide. And internally then, that's the sort of nonsense about small rooms with the sliders. That's the pivot from the kitchen into the dining room, into the living. So that this room actually, this is the 3 beds, but it's really one room. And then the slider has been taken out of here, slides through the wooden frame here, which has a tiny little door, about 100 mil wide, that closes after the door. In fact, the door is gone forever. The door is gone then into its position out of the way to go into its partition, stainless steel counters, and that's the window on the end of it. Next slide on the right. And the staircase to the library. This is the staircase leading onto the roof garden to the very top of the tower. The next slide. And that's the window over and the dome of City Hall, and this sort of seat and these tiny windows and shutters going out onto the roof. And this is where the library is going into that flat. Next slide. And that's the roof garden of the library. The next slide. And that's the last of those slides. Can I give the slide on the left, please? Yeah, there's a staircase. That's the stairs where the final sort of business of sort of oak detailing, where there's this staircase which has the handrail, which is made in the paneling of the stairs on stone steps, which are coming from the street level up to the garden, all that stuff of window making and boarding and brickwork and stuff. And then those are the last of those. And then there's just one other. Next slide, please, on the right and on the left. Yeah, this all of the slides. Turn to the next slide on the left. That's the last slide. Yeah. Just turn off that one on the left for a second. I just want to show the last building that I wanted to show. It's not finished yet, but it's under construction, and there's a nice story to this one, which arises out of. It's in the story of the sort of circumstances or the conditions of what has happened in our office and in a lot of offices in Dublin, where people have extraordinary, sort of scale of work or things that they didn't expect to have when they started in practice, I suppose. And we built a small building in the Financial Services Centre for a guy who owned a radio station, and he went on. And this building was criticised because it was just a brick building, and it wasn't beside. It was beside the financial buildings, and it wasn't posh enough. I think there is a sort of concept in corporate architecture of sort of expense which brick doesn't, and which is not represented by brick. Anyway, he made money out of this brick, which gave him the money to pay for the bid for the mobile phone license, for the first mobile phone license. And so he, I mean, that cost a lot of money to make the bid for the mobile phone. He won the mobile phone against the multinationals, and then in very rapid succession, then he asked them quickly. They wanted the numbers and they wanted offices and stuff like that, and so we got this extraordinary commission to build an office building on in a dockland site on the site of the old Cats and Dogs home. And it's beside a railway and it's up against a stone building, and it faces west and south, and we. So I'm not quite sure how to explain. What happened, but we wanted to build a concrete building, and concrete and glass building, and I'll show you these slides just because they're under. It's an office building, and it's sort of an ordinary office plan, and 14 meters deep, and windows, and all the rest of it. And then, but in the succession of building and in the way of building, it developed, and the building has. In the next slide on the right, please. Behind on the external wall, behind the column is pulled back, the slab is sloped and ribbed to give a narrow joint so that the glass reads from floor to floor, it goes from floor to floor, and then when it goes above the floor, the next slide on the right, that's the same view of it, and the next slide on the right. It steps back so that the balcony, it steps back like a New York building. It steps back not once, twice, and now there's two more floors going on it, and it steps back again, and the glass comes up to take the light free of when it comes above the concrete, free of the building. So it has this extraordinarily beautiful thing of the glass coming, of the wall going up to the next floor. Next slide. And then on the glass, there's the sun is controlled by awnings on the outside of it, and these are just, the building is not finished yet. I don't have a full set of slides, but I'll show you what I have. The next slide, and that's the reception on one floor. The next slide, and then on the floor where it steps back, where the glass comes up, it comes back. And then the canvas awning sort of hangs down on the front to shade the glass. That's all. Thank you very much.
I think Shane still has some energy for maybe a couple of questions. If anyone has any? Maybe I should start so that people can think about the question. But it's obviously an extraordinary range of projects, and it was fantastic to see the whole thing from the beginning of the practice to the. You've kind of on and off referred to the choice of materials. I mentioned this thing about the brick, and then when you were discussing the meeting with your clients and somehow the books on the table, and in a way Kahn and Leverance and Esplund and people like that. And of course the question I want to ask in one sense is, the answer is very clear because you've shown all these projects, but on another level I wonder whether you can speak somehow, possibly polemically or whatever, in defense of this architecture, given that, now it's actually interesting that this last project you're using glass and in a way that maybe wasn't evident in some of the earlier projects. But do you have a particular affinity for, let's say, brick or wood, and have up until recently refused or didn't want to use them because of a particular interest in these traditional materials? It's really, it's more about the relationship between materials and the kind of architecture that you're doing.
Well, I mean, I'm not, there's a whole lot of questions in what you're asking me, but I mean, one simple thing I want to say is that I think it's like that. It's. I mean, the reason I made the presentation in the way it did, because is really deep felt, is that I think it's more important, that it's most important to know the buildings and to know them in all their detail, and that goes through, that always went through my teaching and through criticism and so on, and I think that that's not always, you know, I mean that, and I had I mean, there's a lot that's unsaid, and that needs, I mean, in my view, that needs not to be said, and so therefore I sort of describe it in the way that I do, because I have experience of other people in other ways saying things that are more complicated and that are more, and that make what seem to me to be things that should be said simply and that should be explained in terms of buildings and in the culture, or in all the, I mean, in the, you know, I mean, in the sort of the way we live our work, you know, I mean, which is, I mean, the reality of building buildings, and then in that context, I was going to say something about what's very important is to be able to do what you want to do, and I can do that in technology that I can reach. You know, I mean, we can do. I mean, somebody said, well, why do you build in wood and so on? I mean, it's very difficult. I mean, it's absolutely extremely difficult. I mean, there's, be under no illusion, there is no tougher diet than that. I mean, trying to detail a building or trying to build buildings like that, and that, I mean, in the current, in the professional arrangements that we have to, and that in which we have to work. But it is the stuff of which we know, and I mean, there's so much building that is built that is sort of, and it's really deeply felt that, I mean, I do all my own details and do all, and that's difficult for people in the office, and it's not the same with others in the offices. They're not as involved in everything, because it seems to me is that when you build stuff, it's you that's there. I mean, everything, if it's wrong, it's yours. I mean, and if it doesn't work, I mean, generally you can see it a mile back in a job when things are, where the difficulties are going to come. You know when they're coming, and you know when you made lousy decisions or you let things go, and so on. And so that's sort of, I mean, it's very much oneself, and that in making buildings, that there is not there's trust then, and of having builders and crafts or workshops, and being able to detail things and work with people who you know will respond, or if it goes, I mean, other things go into bigger systems and get out of hand and go away from you, and there's mechanical engineers are doing things, or structural engineers are doing things that are not related to the meaning or the purpose of what you're trying to get at. And so we also have, to get work and to get repeat work, you have to deliver it on budget, and you have to. I mean, the budgets of a lot of those buildings are modest. I mean, the churches are tiny budgets, and I mean, at a certain scale, buildings of a few £1,000,000 or £500,000 or stuff like that. And if the budget is unbalanced, then you don't get any more work. You don't get another job. And the library buildings, the two phases of that there, and that's mundane stuff, but I mean, it matters. And it mattered to us that, I mean, the more important thing, I mean, I said, before, and Tony said it to me earlier, that I said about the library, about the meaning or the possibility of what architecture can do in, of how it speaks to people, or how it speaks. I mean, I could give another talk like that, you know, but I sort of think that that kind of talk is private, in a sense, you know. I mean, that there is, if you're to, yeah, I mean, I could say, I mean, that people talk about the form of buildings and so on like that, or that lecturer who was giving out about Raphael Moneo, I mean, he was saying about the question, about the issues of form. I mean, our society doesn't, there's an awful lot of crass building of tax-driven developments in the city that mean nothing, and that there is no love in it, and or that people could never relate to. And in Italy, when you go to Italy, and they know about buildings, and they know about materials, they know about what they make things out of, and so on, and all that matters, I think. And that's all to do with understanding of architecture and how buildings talk to people, and how they change institutions fundamentally in terms of their well-being. People's well-being is enormously, and the richness of that's possibility. And we've witnessed that. I mean, the power of building, the potential of building, where forms and rooms and light, and where people understand well-being and relationships. I mean, the worst thing is to build things that don't work. I mean, I've built buildings where we did a hospital, we had innings doing some geriatric hospitals at one stage, and then they put patients into it who weren't the kind of patients that it was designed for. And there was like, it's just, I mean, what do you mean by that? I mean, they put people in beds, or they put people, there was for ambulant disabled, and they put people who couldn't walk, and the corridors weren't big enough, and the doors didn't work and stuff. And that's, I think it's, I don't know if I'm answering your question.
I'd like to ask you about your background with Kahn, and your feelings about that now. I think all of what you just said about the need to accommodate circumstances that the sake of the people with Kahn. But Kahn is an architect who has very bold ideas about order, symmetry, formality, and you must have experienced that at Yale. In a way, I found your most Kahnian building that modest of a church in the beginning, whereas the Cork Library, with its concept of symmetry, is likely more of a series, spin on the car. And I wondered how you feel about that, because another building you mentioned by A.B.K., where it's a freestanding building, a relatively formal situation in the college. I'm wondering how you feel about being put in a more exposed and formal situation like that.
Yeah. The first thing I'd say about working in Louis Kahn's office was that he was an extraordinarily kind and gentle and wonderful friend, and good-humoured, and that was and also deeply, deeply philosophical, in his purpose, and in his purpose was his purpose. I mean, whether to say that it was formal, I mean, his purpose was theoretical. His purpose was intellectual, I think. And he talked in abstract. He was very difficult to hear him in a public lecture. It's excruciatingly difficult to listen to. And so I don't know that it's fair to say that if it was formal in the sense that there were rules, and that there were predetermined rules that had to be obeyed. I mean, I think the search was really more for meaning. The search was for for an idea and for meaning in buildings. Really, I don't think it would to characterize it as formal, as distinct from what he would talk about in terms of what he meant by form, architectural form, which was always a sort of complicated or difficult discussion. But what it really meant was the meaning of what he was doing. You know, I mean, he was trying to find the meaning of what was the significance of the building in the university, really, rather than to say that it was formal in the sense, like in the Renaissance sense, or I mean, I think that then to say, you see, Bob Venturi was. I mean, the important thing about Bob Venturi is that Bob Venturi's first studies is art history, and he did come from a very strong. Bob Venturi's. The reason the way the buildings ended up the way they were is because that he was a formalist. I mean, that he was interested in just in form for its own sake and not for its meaning. I mean, that he and in the end the stuff is vacuous. And and it's not really. I don't know what. The National Gallery is an extremely disappointing building, and it's. The aspirations of it in the end are pretty wretched, and so I'm sort of. I don't want to discuss our own work. Except just to. I explained it as best. As fully as I can. In trying to with hesitancy. Clearly determined myself in the form of talk, which is that, and it has been resisted. It was resisted in colleges. In the university, I remember with art when I sometimes taught history in UCD, and I got students to make models of buildings and things, and some of the lecturers in the history of art and our history of architecture objected to this. They objected to the students making models and presenting drawings of things. They wanted dissertations, and I was extremely suspicious of comment and second-hand opinion, particularly from students who maybe didn't know buildings. Who didn't really understand the buildings. So that's very deliberate on my part, not to present it in the way that I did. It's presented like that, and that sort of is trying to answer your question as well.
Anyone else? Any other questions?
You mentioned the American masonry tradition, and I was interested to know whether you were thinking of something Kahn, or to...
No, I was talking about 17th century. No, 17th century. I was talking about the American masonry tradition is Northern European, I think, and say in the salt box, in the timber building where there's a masonry core and so on like that. That's very much a Northern European understanding of wood and brick, and contrast of weight and frame and so on like that. And the 18th century is very beautiful too. Of stone and brick is.
But I was interested in the suggestion that there was a distinct tradition from a European tradition of luxury
I didn't really mean to make much of it. I don't really have an awful lot to say about it. There is, I think in any construction there is compromise, and that's, I mean, it's the level of compromise, or the level of, I mean, there is, there is always accommodation of circumstance. I mean, you're always accommodating circumstance. I mean, you cannot build. I mean, I would love to build in white stone, but
with this, with the timber building in Temple Bar, this idea of kind of circumstance and, in a sense, limit, because the site itself is that something that, do you think in retrospect you enjoyed because of the kind of tightness of the urban situation, because you have to, in one sense, make an architecture, but somehow in terms of the configuration of the three apartment types and their relationship also make a kind of urbanism, even though, you know, it is a very narrow street and the configuration is going inside the block, which presumably is not accessible to the pedestrians, but only to the people who are going to live in there. But there is a clear attempt to try and make a what seems like a very clear kind of urban plan. And I think you kind of talked about that, but it's the first time where this relationship to urbanism becomes very distinct. I suppose at Cork also you discussed that in terms of the relationship of the library to the rest of the campus. But I wonder what your thoughts are in terms of the way in which that architecture actually fits into a sort of larger agenda or a larger idea about how you make a city. So I think somehow, in a sense, in the way that you've discussed many of the projects, there is a very explicit interest in the relationship to a kind of wider context than the individual buildings themselves. So, how did you think about this urbanism of your architecture?
I mean, there's so much is prescribed and there's so much was given. I mean, I would prefer that, I mean, in relation to the whole of that West End, that there was a brief for a residential quarter. And I mean, that would be a real dream. I mean, that would be a wonderful thing. I mean, but that wasn't to be. You know, I mean, that wasn't. You know, I mean, if I mean, we just talked about that. That's all, and it sort of went by us. I mean, we sort of would have preferred. It's very compromised by, I think, by the shops on the ground floor, and the commercial, the intrusion of commercial in the residential area. In that is in our end of the Temple Bar, where that's very corrupt. I think is the mix is that. And I mean, I'd like, and I mean, I would have thought that, you know, that we often thought that we'd prefer to get to be the real. It would be wonderful to build. I mean, the residential district as against that it's very mixed. It's very confusing and full of circumstance and full of. I mean, extraneous things that just, I mean, they're the business of practice, that's all.
But so many contemporary architects, in a sense, celebrate that idea of not having to deal with certain ideal circumstances and enjoying the fact that there are very particular limits. And you seem to, in fact, thrive under those conditions. But I'm surprised that despite that you're still, in a sense, desiring certain forms of ideality, like not to use these art historical things, but I mean, like when you speak about, well, we would have preferred to have dealt with a residential quarter, meaning that would have been a more clear statement.
No, I would have preferred. I mean, we end up with gates on the. I mean, the intention was to have the courtyard, have the garden, the residential garden, was accessible. I mean, it was an open garden to the public. That it was for the residents of the quarter, the residents of the neighbourhood, and just that wasn't to be. So I mean, it doesn't make it. The landscaping in that garden is awful anyway. They got a dreadful landscape architect, and so I mean that's. And
So you mean not only did you want to do the library, you also wanted to do the landscape? Well, that will come too. Maybe. Yeah. Does anyone want to ask? You guys have been, I can just see on your faces listening, but keeping very quiet. Nobody wants to ask the last question? Should we thank Shane? Yes. Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks very much for a wonderful lecture.
thank you very much. Very kind. Thank you very much. Thank you.